When you press the shutter of a 1960s era Instamatic camera, you capture a slice of life about 1/50th of a second long. This works out to be about 1/100 billionth of an average human lifespan. Nevertheless, family photographs usually have meaning far beyond what this small fraction would indicate. This is why we cherish them. They are a window, however small, on our past. It's said a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'm sure that this is sometimes true. Many times, though, the faces don't say very much at all. The stories behind the smiles, glances, and posed groups found in snapshots are obscure, shrouded in the depths of time. Every family has a history, and uncovering that history is a task that's usually undertaken as an adult. Several years ago, while scanning some family photos on a newly acquired flatbed scanner, I came across a snapshot that stuck out. It was taken in Florida in the summer of 1965, judging by the palm trees and the size of my little brother, but oddly my father was in the picture. I grew up in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, but lived in Florida for a time when I was little. As I remembered it, my dad wasn't there at all. I remember times spent with my father as a child, mostly because they were rare events. He was certainly in Florida when that picture was taken, but what were the circumstances? Was he planning to join us, or was it only a visit? Who took the picture? I didn't think that much about it until I came across a box of 8mm home movies. I noticed that one was taken on the same day and in the same place as the snapshot. This short, silent movie was both intriguing and maddening. The addition of motion brought another element of realism to that long-ago scene. My grandmother or great-aunt, who were in the movie, probably took the picture. But I was just as far from understanding what was going on that day. The really important questions remained just as hidden. Fortunately, I can still ask my mother about these kinds of things. So, tell me about that picture, where it was taken, and what was going on.
Well, it was a happy occasion because your father and I had lived in Miami for 5 years, from 1949 to 1952. We had liked it there a lot. Miami was a busy place. It was really hopping. And New Smyrna Beach, where this picture was taken, was a quiet little town. It was too quiet for me at the time because I was young enough to want a town where there was some action. And so we were very happy to be going back to Miami. And your father had made a deal with one of the barbers who used to work for him. He was going to buy the shop, and we were going to be moving down to Miami at the end of the season. But things didn't turn out that way, because the deal was done on a handshake, and it turned out that Nick's wife had the money, not Nick, and when she heard about it, she said no way, and she wouldn't come up with the money. So things didn't work out that way. But at this point, things were good because we were happy. We were looking forward to moving back to Miami, a place we really liked.
It's clear that there was a lot more going on than my 4-year-old perspective saw. As far as I knew, my parents always had separate rooms and separate lives. The reality, it seems, was a bit more complex. Later on, I knew that they had stayed together for the sake of the kids. I remember talking about the situation with my grandmother. Why can't my mother and my father get along? We naturally see and understand more as we get older. I began to believe it would have been better if they had divorced, but would it? I decided to split up with my first wife, partly because of my experience growing up in a house where my parents had stayed together for the sake of the kids. I wanted to show my children a more loving relationship, and thought this was the best way to do it. Or perhaps I was just afraid of winding up in the same situation as my parents. I tried to explain my choice to my father before he died. It took a while, many years in fact, but he did eventually understand. He knew he was miserable in his marriage, but I don't think he realized how this affected us kids. Was my decision right? Was it a better decision than the one my parents made? As I get older and review the choices and decisions my parents made, I've become a lot less certain that we can ever get definitive answers to these kinds of questions. So this movie is mainly about sort of the decision to stay together, sort of for the sake of the kids, or splitting up.
Oh yeah, well I did that all my life. I stayed thinking that was the right thing to do. And then I found out later on that And my kids wished I had left them long ago and they had a different father.
Well, no,
Not exactly.
wouldn't put it that
not,
way.
Not
But
exactly, but and of course some of my friends have said, you know, if you could have left him, and he probably would have taken you back on your own terms. But I didn't. He had eroded my self-confidence to such a degree that even though I was really attractive in those days, I didn't think I could find another person, you know, and I didn't want to go through life by myself.
it sounds like even though you didn't want to go through life by yourself, if you were living on the other ends of the house,
I was going through life by myself anyway.
right. So, I mean, if you had to do it over again, what do you think you'd do?
If I had to do it over again, well, I think I would take my friend's advice, and I would leave, even though he said, well, if you ever leave, you're never going to come back again, because that was evidently an empty threat. Besides, I should have taken the chance. I probably could have found somebody else. Might be better, might have been worse, but it was a chance I could have taken. But
how much of that was thinking about staying together for the kids' sake, or how much was that?
well, as far as I'm concerned, the whole thing was staying together for the sake of, well, it was partly staying together for the kids' sake, and partly that in those days people didn't break up after a few months because things didn't go well. You tried your best to stick it out, to see if, you know, you could manage. Nowadays, when people get married, if it doesn't go well in 6 months or 8 months, they break up and they try somebody else. And neither way is right. I mean, you should just, you know, give it a fair chance, but you shouldn't stay in it for 37 years.
My friend Dave's family history was very similar to mine, so I asked him how his experiences growing up affected his decisions in his marriage.
Well, my parents had a really rotten marriage. They got married in August of 1944, and my mother divorced my dad in roughly August of 1980. I think it was October 1980. So 36 years later, and as she described it, 36 years of misery and hell. They had a hard time conceiving, so this took 10 years for my older brother to come along, and then another 7 for me. So they were already 17 years into the marriage when they had me. And my mother felt a great deal of pressure from her parents to stay married. They were Orthodox Jews and didn't believe in divorce and thought you should defer to your husband. So she stayed and was miserable. I was born in the Catskill Mountains and lived there until I was 17 and went to college, and thought many, many, many times as I was growing up how much I wish my parents would get a divorce and not have to live in utter misery every day with yelling and screaming and hating each other. And I still pretty much believe that is the case, that it would have been better if they had split up. Though, as I've gotten older, I just turned 40. I think a little less clearly about it now. Knowing my mom, and I think she's a wonderful woman, but doesn't always make great choices in men. Probably would have found somebody who wasn't all that great, too. So even if she had gotten divorced, it's possible she could have found somebody as bad as my dad, or even worse. I used to think of it as it was an obvious decision that my mother should have left my dad. He was so awful to her. And I've grown to realize the tremendous pressure she had on her to stay married. And she said she essentially did it for me, being the youngest child. You know, she left my dad 1 month after I left for college. And I always thought if she had left him when I was an infant, that would have been great. I wouldn't have known him. But I'm realizing that a dad is pretty important in a kid's life. You know, my dad was a destructive force, but that doesn't mean that I had to be a destructive force in my kids' lives. So when I got separated, it was a pretty big deal for me, the thought of leaving my kids. Probably like it was for my mom. You know, the idea of having a separation, though she would have had the kids. So I guess, so the answer to the question in a way is no. I don't think that my parents relationship, and the fact that they didn't divorce early affected my decision greatly to not divorce my wife. We ended up getting back together and are very happy.
A different situation, really. Yeah.
Yeah, very different. And I'm glad I hung in there because I think most problems are fixable if both people decide they want to work on them. And the difference is my dad never thought anything was wrong with him, never decided to fix what was broken with him. So, there was a difference right there.
Right. Another friend, John's parents, stayed in a rocky marriage as well. He and his wife split up when their daughter was about 10 years old, but feels that this decision didn't have an adverse effect on her. They co-parent as smoothly now as when they were married. Each of us had similar family backgrounds, yet made different decisions regarding our own marriages. Each situation is unique, and we have to make the best decision that we can at any given time and hope for the best. I'm sure that's what our parents did as well. I began to think about some snapshots that are in my own photo albums. I remember a trip I took to Florida with my first wife and kids about the time that we split up. What would my children remember about that trip? What would they think about snapshots taken at that time? My children grew up with parents that were divorced. Will they stick out a poor marriage to avoid a similar fate for their own kids? The opposite of the decision I made? Will they really understand my choices? I can only hope that they make the best decisions that they can at the time, and we will all hope for the best.